Montana Territory, 1875. The merciless frontier had a way of making even the strongest soul surrender to its harsh demands. In the shadowed valleys of the Bitterroot Mountains, where civilization barely clung to the edges of wilderness, 25-year-old August Palmer guided his horse through the moonlit grasslands. The night air carried the scent of pine and distant campfires as he returned from a 3-day cattle drive. August believed the frontier demanded isolation. After watching his father work himself to death on their homestead and his mother succumb to illness with no doctor for 50 miles, he'd adopted a simple truth. Attachment was a luxury the West didn't permit. A cowboy survived by remaining untethered to land, to people, to hope beyond the next season. He'd built his reputation as a reliable ranch hand who never stayed longer than the work required. A man who kept his distance from the saloon girls and farmers' daughters who might trap a man with dreams of permanence. What August wanted was simple: earn enough to buy a small claim far from others, where he could run a modest herd without answering to anyone. What he told himself he didn't need were the complications of family, the vulnerability of love, or the weight of others depending on him. The West had taught him that lesson through blood and loss. As August crossed the final ridge before the Oakley ranch where he'd been employed these past 2 months, he heard something carried on the night breeze. He reined his horse to a stop, listening. There it was again, a sound that didn't belong to coyotes or night birds. A human sound, muffled and broken. Dismounting, August led his horse quietly toward the source. The moon emerged from behind a cloud, illuminating a solitary figure seated on a fallen log near the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the Oakley property. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, her face buried in her hands. Teresa Oakley, the 20-year-old daughter of the ranch owner, sat alone beneath the vast Montana sky, crying as though her heart might break. Her dark brown hair, usually bound in a practical braid, fell loose around her shoulders, and her simple blue calico dress seemed silvery in the moonlight. August had spoken with her only a handful of times since taking employment with her father, always brief, always proper. She managed the household since her mother's passing 2 years prior, and the ranch hands knew to treat her with respect. August hesitated, unsure whether to make his presence known or retreat. Men's comfort wasn't his trade. But something about her solitude beneath the enormous sky stirred something long dormant in him. Before he could decide, his horse nickered softly, and Teresa's head snapped up. She hurriedly wiped at her face, struggling to compose herself. "Who's there?" "Just me, Miss Oakley." "August Palmer." He stepped forward, leading his horse. "I was returning from the north pasture. I didn't mean to intrude." Teresa straightened her back, attempting dignity despite her tear-stained face. "Mr. Palmer, I didn't expect anyone out this way tonight." August nodded, awkward in the silence that followed. He should bid her good night and continue to the bunkhouse. Instead, he found himself asking, "Are you all right, Miss Oakley?" "Of course." Her voice broke on the words, betraying her. August took a few steps closer, then stopped, respecting the proper distance between a ranch hand and the owner's daughter. But something about her distress cut through his practiced detachment. "Your tears end tonight," he said softly, the words emerging before he could consider them. "Whatever troubles you, it won't last forever." Teresa looked up, her hazel eyes reflecting moonlight and surprise. "My father says tears are a luxury we can't afford out here." "Your father says a lot of things." August offered a small smile. "Doesn't make them all true." That simple exchange in the moonlight changed everything. What August couldn't have known was that Teresa had just received word that her aunt in Boston, her last living relative besides her father, had died. The letter had arrived that afternoon, and with it, the final severance of Teresa's connections to a gentler world beyond the frontier. "My aunt passed," Teresa said, her voice steadier now. "She wanted me to come east, to have the education and life she thought I deserved. Now that door is closed forever." August remained silent, but he didn't leave. Instead, he tethered his horse to a nearby sapling and, after a moment's hesitation, sat on the far end of the log. "I'm sorry for your loss," he finally said. "I know something of losing the paths you thought might still be open to you." Teresa studied him in the moonlight. "You've never spoken more than 10 words to me before tonight, Mr. Palmer. Perhaps I never had anything worth saying. And now you do?" A challenge in her voice, beneath the sorrow. August looked out at the vast landscape, silver-touched under the moon. Only that I understand feeling trapped by this land. And also knowing there's nowhere else you'd rather be, even with its hardships. This contradiction, the first honest thing he'd shared with anyone in years, sparked something between them. Teresa's tears had stopped, replaced by curiosity about this quiet cowboy who suddenly had poetry in him. Over the next weeks, August found himself lingering after supper, offering to help with tasks that might put him in Teresa's path. They spoke of small things at first, the health of the cattle, the changing weather, books she'd read that he'd only heard of. He discovered she ran the ranch accounts with a precision that put many bankers to shame, and she learned he could identify every constellation in the night sky, knowledge passed down from his Cherokee grandmother. You could have your own spread by now, Teresa observed one evening as they sat on the porch, a proper distance apart, while her father reviewed contracts in his study. Father says you're the best hand he's had in years. Why do you keep moving on? August considered the question, watching a hawk circle in the distance. What's the point of building something just to lose it? Is loss so certain? Out here? Always. He hadn't meant to sound so bitter. Teresa was quiet for a long moment. My mother used to say that the frontier doesn't take everything. Only what we're unwilling to fight for. The words unsettled August, challenging his long-held belief that attachment was a weakness the West would inevitably exploit. Yet each conversation with Teresa revealed a strength in her that didn't fit his understanding. She had lost as much as he had, but instead of withdrawing, she'd poured herself into preserving what remained. In early September, nearly 2 months after their Moonlit encounter, everything changed. A small band of rustlers hit the Oakley ranch while most hands were moving cattle to the lower pastures. August and Teresa found themselves alone at the main house when 4 armed men rode into the yard. "Stay inside," August ordered, checking his revolver. Teresa already had her father's shotgun in hand. "This is my home. I won't hide while it's threatened." There was no time to argue. The men demanded money, horses, and whatever else they could carry. When Teresa refused, their leader advanced menacingly. "Your father's not here to protect you, girl. Best be reasonable." August stepped between them. "The lady asked you to leave." What followed was brief, but violent. August took a bullet in his shoulder, but managed to drop 2 rustlers before they fled. As the sound of gunshots faded, he found himself on his knees, Teresa pressing a cloth to his wound. "Don't you dare die on me, August Palmer," she commanded, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Not when I've just found someone worth keeping." Those words, spoken in desperation, revealed what had been growing between them. As Teresa tended his wound, August confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd fallen in love with her, her strength, her determination, her refusal to surrender to the frontier's harshness. August recovered slowly, moved from the bunkhouse to a spare room where Teresa could tend him. Her father, grateful for August's protection of his daughter, watched with a mixture of concern and understanding as the pair grew closer during his convalescence. "She deserves better than a wandering cowboy," August told Thomas Oakley one evening. The older man studied him thoughtfully. "What she deserves is someone who sees her strength, not just her vulnerability. Someone who'll stand beside her, not in front of her." The words struck August deeply. He'd been so focused on what the frontier might take that he'd missed what it offered. The chance to build something meaningful despite the risks, not in denial of them. Just as August's shoulder was healing, disaster struck. A telegram arrived announcing the foreclosure of a loan Thomas Oakley had taken 3 years prior. The bank was calling in the debt, $5,000 by month's end, or the ranch would be auctioned. "How could you not tell me?" Teresa confronted her father that night, her voice breaking with betrayal. "I keep the books. I could have helped. I thought I could fix it," Thomas admitted, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "The drought 2 years ago, then losing the army contract. I borrowed against the future. Now there is no future." August listened from the doorway, witnessing Teresa's world collapse for the second time since he'd known her. Later that night, he found her in the same spot by the creek where they'd first truly spoken. "We'll lose everything," she said without looking up as he approached. "This land is all I have left of my mother. It's everything." August sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Your father is proud. Too proud to see that asking for help isn't weakness. There's no help to ask for. No one has that kind of money. August was silent for a long moment. I do. Teresa turned to him, confusion clear on her face. I told you I wanted enough for my own small claim someday. What I didn't tell you is that I've been saving every penny for 7 years. I have nearly 6,000 in the Billings Bank. August, I couldn't. You could, he interrupted. As an investment. As a partner. He paused, gathering courage. Or as more than that, if you wanted. The moonlight caught the tears gathering in her eyes. But these were different from the ones he'd witnessed months before. These held hope, possibility. Why would you do this? She whispered. Because I was wrong, August said simply. The frontier doesn't demand isolation. It demands finding the people worth fighting alongside. He took her hand, a boldness he wouldn't have imagined months earlier. I've been running from connection my whole life, Teresa. Running from the pain of losing what matters. But watching you, your strength, your commitment to this land and the people who depend on it, I realized that some things are worth the risk of heartbreak. Teresa's hand tightened around his. And am I? Worth that risk? August's answer was to lean forward and kiss her, gently at first, then with all the emotion he'd held back for so long. The next morning, August and Teresa presented Thomas with a proposition. August would provide the funds to save the ranch, in exchange for a partnership and Thomas's blessing for his courtship of Teresa. The older man studied August with new eyes, seeing not just a hired hand, but a man offering both salvation and devotion. You've hidden depths, Palmer, Thomas said finally. But Teresa doesn't need my permission for her heart. She never has. Their newfound partnership faced its greatest test just days before the loan payment was due. While August was in Billings withdrawing his savings, word came that Jeremy Sloan, a wealthy cattle baron from Wyoming, had arrived in the territory. Sloan had been pressuring smaller ranchers to sell out, sometimes through questionable means. When August returned, he found Sloan's men surrounding the Oakley Ranch house. Convenient timing for the bank to call in that loan, August remarked to Teresa as they watched from the barn. Almost as if someone wanted this land badly enough to arrange it. Teresa's eyes narrowed. Father refused to sell to Sloan 3 times this year, and now Sloan can buy it at auction for a fraction of its worth. August checked his revolver. Not if I have anything to say about it. What followed was not a gunfight. August had learned enough about Teresa to know she'd never accept a solution built on violence unless absolutely necessary. Instead, he rode directly to Sloan's camp, the bank draft for $6,000 visible in his breast pocket. Mr. Sloan, August called out, remaining mounted as the men reached for their weapons. I believe you've miscalculated. Sloan, a gray-haired man with cold eyes, studied August with the detached interest of someone assessing livestock. And you are? August Palmer, partner in the Oakley Ranch. He patted the pocket containing the bank draft. The loan will be paid in full tomorrow morning. Sloan's expression hardened. Partnerships can be dissolved. Accidents happen on the frontier. They do, August agreed. Which is why I've taken the precaution of having our arrangement, including evidence of your manipulation of the bank, documented with the territorial marshal. This was a bluff, but one August delivered with complete conviction. You can fight us and draw unwanted attention, or you can find easier prey. For a tense moment, August thought he'd miscalculated. Then Sloan gave a thin smile. Perhaps I underestimated the Oakley's resources. There are other ranches. There are, August agreed. Far from here. By the time August returned to the ranch, Teresa was waiting anxiously in the yard. When he explained what had happened, her expression shifted from relief to something deeper. You didn't shoot your way out. You used your head. August dismounted, standing before her. I'm learning there are different kinds of strength. Different ways to protect what matters. Teresa stepped closer. And what matters to you, August Palmer? His answer was to drop to one knee, there in the dusty yard. You. This land. The life we could build together. He took her hand. I came to Montana believing the frontier left no room for love, that attachment was a luxury I couldn't afford. You showed me I was wrong. Marry me, Teresa. Not just to save the ranch, but because I want to wake up beside you for the rest of my days. Teresa pulled him to his feet, her eyes bright with tears and joy. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 weeks later, after the loan was paid and the threat of foreclosure removed. The ceremony was small, just the local preacher, Thomas, and the ranch hands who'd become like family. Teresa wore her mother's dress, and August wore a new suit purchased in Billings. They exchanged vows beneath the same sky that had witnessed their first real conversation. By spring of 1876, August and Teresa had transformed the struggling Oakley Ranch into a thriving operation. August's practical knowledge combined with Teresa's business acumen created a partnership that extended far beyond marriage. Thomas, relieved of the burden of sole responsibility, found new joy in teaching them the deeper knowledge of the land he'd accumulated over decades. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, August took Teresa's hand. She was carrying their first child, due in late summer. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your chance at a different life? The education your aunt wanted for you?" Teresa looked out at the land they'd fought for, the home they'd built together. "I'm learning every day. About cattle and crops, about business and banking." She turned to him, the last rays of sunlight catching in her hair. "About how love doesn't make you weaker in this harsh place. It makes you stronger." August drew her close. "I spent years believing the frontier was no place for love. That survival meant standing alone. And now," he placed his hand gently on her growing belly, feeling the future stirring beneath his palm. "Now I know the truth. We don't survive the frontier in spite of love. We survive it because of love." As darkness fell and stars appeared overhead, August thought of that night months ago when he'd found Teresa crying beneath the moonlit sky. How far they'd both come from that moment. He from his solitary existence, she from her fears of loss and limitation. Together, they discovered that the vastness of the frontier wasn't emptiness to be feared, but space to build something true and lasting. The Montana Territory would never be tame, but in their corner of it, August and Teresa Palmer had created something the harsh land couldn't take away, a home founded not just on determination and grit, but on the love that had transformed them both.